Good afternoon. It is Matthew with Dead to Rights. This afternoon, not morning. This afternoon, I've got a quick topic I just want to kind of talk about, and that's why, as a Christian, I don't vote. I know that's going to be pretty weird. It is unusual in our country, in the United States of America, that you have somebody who specifically says, out of religious reasons, that they don't choose to vote. Mine's pretty simple. Well, I don't know. It's simple to me. I hope it's simple. I hope I'm able to explain it simply. And the short explanation is because I make a distinction between what I would call civil responsibilities and Christian responsibilities. And there are some responsibilities that go between the two, and then there are some that I don't see compatibility with. For example, a civil responsibility is to obey the law. Well, that's compatible with Christianity. I think that Christianity goes above and beyond the law in doing what is good and upright. In terms of voting, as a Christian, I have to ask myself, well, what do I vote for? Now, one of the purposes of this channel, the reason that I call this channel Dead to Rights, is because I live with a mentality that I don't live to myself, but I live a life that is figuratively dead to its own rights. So I'm not living life assuming that I get to make of it what I want. What I should be doing as a Christian is living my life in accordance to what God wants for my life. There are people in history who have suffered great things because that's what God wanted them to do. Whether it was to share the gospel, to stand up for something, to oppose some kind of evil, their life did not go great, were trampled on in service to what God wanted out of them. And so I want to live my life not for what people tell me I should get out of it, but what God tells me I should get out of it. So if I can live a moral and upstanding and well founded life that is built on the model of Jesus Christ, that is better for me than if I live an easy life and I have property and my rights are upheld and I've got a good job and I'm making good money. All of those things are in service to my Christian duty. Whatever my Christian duty have me do, if it opposes even my own self, if it turns out to be not for my benefit, not for my temporary, momentary benefit, I am still supposed to uphold my Christian duty above all things. So I make a distinction in certain aspects between my responsibilities as a Christian and my responsibilities as a citizen. I also make a distinction between my responsibilities as a Christian and the nation's responsibilities as a sovereign nation. Those two things are not equal to each other. You see, there are many things that a nation has the right to do, Christians does not have the right to do, because a Christian given up their rights for the glory and the honor of Jesus. So while a nation can defend itself, I don't believe a Christian ought to defend himself because we model ourselves after Jesus, who didn't defend himself. So, to voting. Why I don't vote is because As a Christian, what would I be obligated to support? Well, I would be obligated to support Christian laws. Well, what does that mean? So, as a Christian, I support Islam, I support atheism. No, I wouldn't. But as a Christian, am I supposed to coerce people living a Christian life? No, I'm not supposed to do that. I think I'm supposed to live a life and let my words and my actions convince people to Christ without me putting a hand against them to make them. See, I don't believe in Catholicism. Catholicism had an early Catholicism, well, not early Catholicism, but in Roman Catholicism. If you were baptized, you were punished economically, socially. Sometimes you were put in prison, and some people, because they disagree with the church, were just outright put to death. That's not the model. And so when I'm considering voting, well, what do I vote for? Do I vote for people's religious freedom? When, as a Christian, I don't think we have religious freedom. And so I believe that every man and woman ought to believe in Jesus Christ. That's what I believe. So I necessarily don't believe in Islam, and this isn't an area of bigotry. It's an area of belief. I would hope that a Muslim would look at me and say, "Well, I don't want you to be Christian because I don't believe that. I believe that's against Allah or whatever." So as a Christian, how can I support Islam when I think that the people who believe in Islam are going to die one day and be punished? Well, that doesn't make very much sense. That's not very compassionate of me if I truly believe it. So should I coerce religion? Should I coerce morality? And in a sense, all law is a moral judgment. If you say that murder or theft is going to be punishable by prison or by death, you are saying that there is a moral weight to those actions. But I don't think that Jesus coerced people. I think that Jesus was at peace with people. And even people who hated him, he didn't live his life to coerce them. He lived his life to convince them through his own actions, through his works, through his teaching. So the primary reason that I don't vote is because I wouldn't know what to vote for. I'm not going to vote for things that aren't Christian, and I'm not going to vote for things that are Christian because I don't want to coerce people into believing things that I believe because that's not what belief is. I hope that makes sense. The second reason that I don't vote is because who would I vote for? Who am I going to put my stamp of approval behind? And I've heard it very many times, the argument, the lesser of two evils is who you should vote for. That if you're not voting for this person, you're voting for the person who's worse. To me, it's a foolish argument. Me choosing not to do something is not me supporting the opposite opinion or decision. That's not me putting my stamp of approval. That's me disapproving of any option because I have a choice in the matter. And I choose to disapprove of every side. Has Donald Trump benefited the church? Maybe in some ways he has. And when I say church, I really just mean cultural Christianity. I think there's a distinction, and I could talk about that some other time, but I don't have enough time right now to talk about the distinction between what I would call cultural Christianity and true Christianity or authentic Christianity. But Donald Trump certainly isn't a Christian. At least in the sense of he's not a Christian that I would point people to as a model. And until Donald Trump started living that way, I'm not going to point anybody to him. I'll say I wouldn't want my wife to be around Donald Trump. If I had a daughter, I wouldn't trust her around Donald Trump, at the very least because I think that he objectifies people. Donald Trump is not a moral and upright man by any stretch of the imagination. He doesn't show remorse for the things in his life that he's done. I'm not talking about his fitness to be president. This isn't what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is my opinion on who I should vote for if I decided to pick up a pen and vote. Who would I be obligated to vote for as a Christian? You see, I believe in two nations. I believe that there's a nation of the world and then there's a nation of faith, which is in Jesus Christ, where all Christians live. And that nation is greater than the nation of the world. And the nation of the world is subservient to the nation of Jesus Christ. So when I live for that kingdom. I live for Jesus' kingdom and not this kingdom. I might live in America. I'm not going to war against America. I'm not going to try to disrupt America. I'm not going to try to overthrow America. On that sense, and I might talk about this again some point, but I think the Revolutionary War was wrong from a Christian sense. Was it wrong from just a general, you know, we're just a people of a nation who are oppressed kind of sense? I don't know. But in the sense of a Christian, if you wanted to establish a Christian nation, the worst way you could do that is by revolting against the nation in which you dwell, in which you were called to honor the person who is over you. You're supposed to honor the king, and that you revolt against them and you kill them and you go to war with them. But in terms of voting, I would say, as a Christian, now I'm not going to go so far as to say that I think that if you vote that you're in sin as a Christian, or that you are. Now I think you're wrong. But I'm not going to say you're in sin. I'm not going to say that God is sitting there telling you that you need to not vote, and if you don't, then somehow God. That's not who God is. But I would say that it is better for a Christian to withhold himself from voting as a sign of faith in God and a lack of trust in worldly powers and kingdoms. But if you vote as a Christian, I have I really have a couple encouragements. Number one, you should not vote unless you feel convinced that the person you're voting for is God's chosen person for that nation. Unless you feel convinced that God has chosen that person to lead your nation, if you haven't prayed about it, if you haven't sought the Lord, if you haven't read scripture while you're deciding on who to vote for, you shouldn't vote. So vote with prayer and confidence that you truly think that God has chosen that person that you're voting for to lead your country. Secondly, you should support God's will no matter what. If your person wins, you support them. If the other person wins, you support them. And I'm not talking about support in the sense of I like everything they do or I agree with everything they do, but I support their rule over the nation because God has put them there. You see, Joe Biden was put in place just like Donald Trump was, just like Obama was, just like Bush was. Each of these were put in their place by God. And unless you're going to look at it and say, okay, God has put this person here. I might not like it. I might not agree with it, but I'm going to trust God and I'm going to support the person that God has placed over me. I'm going to honor them and obey them and respect them as the leaders of the nation. And you should say, if you voted for somebody and they don't win, you should say, I was wrong about God's will for this nation. If you can do that, then by all means vote. I would still have questions about what you should vote for and who you should vote for as a Christian. I think we should leave these things to the world and we should get out of worldly affairs almost entirely. That's my encouragement. If you decide to vote, or if you voted in the past, vote with confidence, vote with faith, but always, always vote for God's will, what you believe to be God.